I will start in Russian language and then introduce you. Дорогие участники, приветствуем вас на третьем дне Глобальной недели предпринимательства. В Казахстане в 2020 году движение «Глобальная неделя предпринимательства» проходит при поддержке проекта USAID. И благодаря проекту USAID у нас есть возможность приглашать международных спикеров на эту конференцию, на эти 3 дня. И вот одним из международных спикеров сегодня является Робин Батлер, директор по инвестициям Sturgeon Capital. И сегодняшняя тема – это возможности и испытания, с которыми сталкиваются стартапы или могут столкнуться стартапы из Центральной Азии при желании получить инвестиции, при переговорах, при вообще при мыслях о инвестиционных сделках. Итак, представляю вам Робина и передаю слово. Robin, hello, we are so happy to have you. Some of them are entrepreneurs, and some of the participants are organizations which are incubators and accelerators from Central Asia. So give a word to you.
Sure. No, first, thank you very much, Dinara, and everyone else from MOST and the organizers of this event. Really looking forward to speaking to you all today and addressing some of the opportunities and challenges that Central Asian startups face. This is based on our experience at Sturgeon Capital. I'll start by giving a quick introduction to who we are, and then kind of go into some more detail about what it is that we look for in businesses, which I hope will give you some insight as entrepreneurs yourselves or as incubators and accelerators as to the kind of the expectations and desires of investors. Okay, so Sturgeon Capital is a frontier markets venture capital firm. We invest in technology and technology-enabled businesses that are solving key problems for the mass market, that is for both businesses and consumers. We're a team split between our main head office in London with local regional representatives. We've actually been operating in Central Asia for over 15 years now. We have a lot of experience in Kazakhstan, in Uzbekistan, Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Russia as well. And so we like to think that we have a pretty good understanding of the region and what it takes to be successful there, having worked with some very talented entrepreneurs over the years. I think that the sort of the place to start for looking at what we do with our funds is what we've been doing for 15 years, and particularly over the last 2 years, is investing in some of the leading innovators in Central Asia. That is entrepreneurs such as yourselves, who are building businesses that not only generate financial returns, but are also creating a positive impact within the economies and societies within which they're based. What we look for in these businesses is companies that are offering a product or service which solves an unserved acute pain point in the economy. That is, it's solving a problem which affects the day-to-day lives of businesses or consumers. We believe this is very important for the long-term success of a business, and it creates a much stickier customer base than perhaps more transient issues. The second key aspect that we look for is addressing a large market. That is businesses which can be successful not only in the country that they operate in, but also across the wider Central Asia region, essentially within within the CIS region, and then globally. And the third aspect that that I think is very tied into who I'm speaking to today is the entrepreneurs and the founders of these businesses. For us, we look to invest in founders and management teams that have a track record. Now that can either be within other startups, so they have either built and exited startups previously, or they have a very in-depth understanding and experience of the sector within which they're operating. That is, they really know what the key problems are, and so how to solve them in a way which works for the industry that they're operating in. Taking a step back, and this slide is really looking at the ecosystem and the environment within which entrepreneurs such as yourselves are operating, and some of the key differences between the environment you operate in and, say, the environment that entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley or elsewhere in the West operate. And there are certainly some challenges that come with this, but we actually believe the opportunities for yourselves are greater in many ways, particularly if once these challenges are overcome, you tend to build stronger, more sustainable businesses with greater competitive advantages. The first key point, and this is slightly kind of coming at it from our side as an investor, is the funding model for yourselves as frontier market entrepreneurs is very different to those in more developed markets. In all likelihood, you will have at some point found it difficult to raise capital due to a relatively small pool of available capital. Now that's no reflection on your business. That's no reflection on your ability. It's just the sort of facts on the ground that there aren't a huge number of investors investing in early stage businesses across Central Asia and Kazakhstan. Now, what's very encouraging is incubators and accelerators such as MOST and others who have come onto the scene in Kazakhstan and providing more of that ecosystem. However, the reality is that compared to more developed markets, it's still very limited. And what we find this does, what we find this forces frontier markets entrepreneurs to do is to build much more sustainable businesses. That is, you can't use the Western model of using sort of cheap or plentiful venture capital to fund growth with a very sort of limited view of profitability and this sort of idea that it'll happen down the line at some point and people will buy into it and you'll IPO and it'll all be great. The reality is, if you don't have that venture capital, plentiful venture capital available, you can't use that model. And so you have to focus on profitability earlier, on sustainability, on being able to survive challenges and sort of ebbs and flows within the markets. Now, I understand this is a frustration and a challenge for you as a business at an early stage. But what we tend to find is that by focusing on this, by focusing on profitability, by focusing on the sustainability of the business, being able to grow when capital is available, being able to sort of rein it back in when it isn't, is that you can build a business which in the longer term, that the risk of failure is much lower, which for us as investors is very interesting. And I think should always be something in your mind as an entrepreneur is not sort of banking on this constant sort of rapid growth that maybe you see happen every now and again, but those are really the outliers, businesses that do that. It takes a long time to build a business, particularly in an environment where funding is limited. I think that the second key point that I wanted to pull out from here was this idea of creators versus disruptors. Now, a lot of the time in say the US or Europe, startups that come onto the scene are looking to disrupt an existing industry. So we take financial services. There's a plethora, a huge number of fintech banks that have arrived on the scene recently that are all attempting to improve the customer experience, offer more intuitive UX, UI, all these sorts of things. But the difficulty they face is everyone in Europe already has a bank account and they already use the financial system in a way that they're comfortable with. They've got used to And so to change their habits is very difficult. Now, as a disruptor, this is what you're always fighting against. Your customer acquisition costs tend to be very high as you try and persuade people that what they've done for a very long time isn't what they should be doing now, and that they should switch to working on using your model. Now, what we tend to find is that in frontier markets, the opposite is true, is that actually very often there isn't an existing infrastructure, an existing way of doing things that people are used to. And that as an entrepreneur building a business, quite often it falls on your shoulders to really build out that infrastructure and that environment in which your business can grow. That in itself is a challenge. It entails different costs. It entails having to operate sort of perhaps beyond your core competency and what your core business was about. But ultimately, we see that this reduces your customer acquisition costs and allows you to build a business which has a much stronger and more durable competitive advantage through the localization that you have to do in the environment that you operate. Now, the statistic there that 63% of startups are creating new industries is taken from a study that we use quite a lot. So I guess the advice here is where you're looking at starting these businesses in frontier economies, really think about what you can create and what you are building afresh. And when you're doing that, you'll tend to find that actually the ability to scale and grow your business, in our experience, is much faster and cheaper. This slide I realize should probably be titled from our side is why do we invest in Central Asia? I mean, is ultimately because of entrepreneurs such as yourself. If there weren't entrepreneurs such as yourself building great businesses, we wouldn't be looking at Central Asia. I mean, we would, because there are a variety of things on here that make it very attractive as a place to invest, and I think also as a place to build a business. But really, it's you guys who are out there building businesses that are solving issues for the mass market. That's the real reason we invest. But just to pick up on a couple of points here, what we see across Central Asia is a sort of a shift from economies that have historically been dominated by the state to ones where private enterprise is being actively encouraged and is growing from a very low base. What this is in itself is a strong positive secular trend, which for us as investors is interesting. By secular trend, I mean something that doesn't rely on macro tailwinds. So it doesn't rely just on GDP growth, but relies on something which is more fundamental. And this growth of private enterprise offers opportunities for entrepreneurs, both building those enterprises themselves, but also building the services and products which feed and provide the ecosystem for those enterprises. Another secular trend is the digitalization of the economy. Now, that's the sort of leapfrogging from sort of pre-mobile, pre-internet into an environment where internet and mobile penetration is as high as it is in most countries in the world, if not higher. This, I think, for you as entrepreneurs, offers a strong base, digital infrastructure base on which to build technology-enabled businesses. It's not saying that your business has to be technology-enabled, but I think in this environment, or in today's age, you'd struggle to build a truly scalable business that wasn't. The sort of points 4 and 5 are slightly sort of tied together. Now, what we as a firm tend to prefer, and this is not a sort of hard rule, is taking business models which have been tried and tested in other parts of the world, both frontier and developed economies, and implementing them and localizing them in Central Asia. Now, what you're doing here is you're not reinventing the wheel. You're taking something that's worked elsewhere and just bringing it in, but the challenge is always actually localizing it to make it really successful. You can't just copy what works in Silicon Valley and expect it to work in Kazakhstan. it just isn't going to work. I mean, Silicon Valley doesn't work in London. It doesn't work in Moscow. It doesn't work anywhere else. It works in Silicon Valley because of a very particular set of factors all coming together at the right time over a very long period of time. So that's taking these tried and tested business models, localizing them offers huge opportunities. And what talking about efficiency gains kind of ties into sort of previously more managed economies. A lot of people are still using paper or Excel for their businesses, for their sort of day-to-day lives and management. There's a lot of opportunity there to bring efficiency gains through technology. And we think businesses there are really interesting and have strong potential for the future. What I have here, and this is a very wordy slide, so I'm not going to read through all of it, don't worry, and I'm not expecting you to now. But what I wanted to try and put on paper in front of you and to sort of walk through is what we as investors are looking at in a business, and this sort of strict criteria, this checklist of what we're looking for, to give you a sense of perhaps things you should be thinking about. Not, I'm going to try and tell you how to run your business. You will understand it much better than me, but to be aware of when you're thinking about presenting your business to other people, particularly investors. I think there's always that slight information asymmetry in that you understand your business and the sector you're operating in incredibly well. An investor is just by nature of the fact they're not operating your business, always going to struggle to, is never going to have access to the same degree of information and experience that you do. So being able to present exactly what it is you're doing, how you're doing it, the way you're going about it is very important for investors. And I think also if you can do it, it's that sort of proof that you yourselves really understand it. So this idea of business model is, and it varies, that this will vary depending where you are in the stage of the development of your business. If you're very early stage, your business model may not be clear. You might have ideas about customer acquisition and your sort of monetization, but you may not have actually implemented them. And we see businesses at this stage a lot. You may be further down the line. You may have started monetizing. You may have shifted completely from what you were planning to do before. But being able to present what it is you're doing at the moment and what it is you're planning on doing is vital. Having the right team in place. Now, you might have all the skills you need when you start the business. However, as it grows, I can guarantee you that there will be skills that are needed for the businesses to be successful that you don't have. So thinking, is it at the very beginning, you need co-founders with you who can bring experience you don't have that you lack? Is it further down the line? Kind of how do you find these individuals? When do you think you'll need them? That's vital. Competitive advantage. I mean, what is your competitive advantage? The kind of question we always ask companies is, how easy or sort of how difficult is it for someone else to do exactly the same thing as you're doing? And that's a challenge which, particularly at an early stage when you haven't built up much of a sort of market position, is quite difficult to answer. But always be thinking, how can I establish a competitive advantage? And this comes back to what I was talking about before about building your own ecosystem. If you're building the infrastructure on which you rely and you own it yourselves, it becomes very difficult for anyone else to then enter that market further down the line and compete with you. Now, it doesn't matter if they're a global, very successful company; it still becomes difficult. This idea of your scalable, addressable market, having a large market is I think very important. It's all very well developing a wonderful product that is very successful in Almaty, but can you scale it to Nur Sultan? Can you scale it to Tashkent? Can you scale it to Moscow? You need, if you can, and if you believe your business has that potential to be successful regionally and globally, then fantastic, you're really onto a winner. If it can't, but you think that only a little bit needs changing, then really it's easier to change the direction of the ship sort of early on while it's smaller, rather than waiting till you have this sort of huge organization or much larger organization and then suddenly trying to change tack. What I put when I put the sort of risk side here. Now, for us as investors, that's always trying to understand what's the risks of the business failing, and it's also something you as an entrepreneur are keenly aware of. I think you often be much more aware of what the risks are on a day-to-day basis for the business. And what I would recommend is trying to implement the data infrastructure and framework that lets you really track those risks. It's all very well coming up with a wordy description of what you think the risks are for your business. If you can quantify that and track it, it'll put your business in a much stronger position to understand where it is, what potential threats there might be that are starting to just appear a little bit within your business ecosystem. And the earlier you can spot them, the easier they will be to deal with. One quite important point, if we look at the kind of valuation side, and kind of, I suppose, a word of advice, a word of warning, that when you're raising money from investors, it's obviously you want to raise money at the highest, you think you want to raise money at the highest valuation, because that's clearly saying that your business is very successful right now, and it may be accurate. But for us, one of the key risks we see in a business raising money at a high valuation early on is you can put yourself in a position where it becomes very difficult to raise money in 12 months time. Because if you raise money at a 10 million valuation right now, or a 5 million valuation right now, but in reality, your business is still at a pretty early stage, what have you got to do to make your valuation 10 million in a year's time? If that requires essentially unachievable growth dynamics and development and everything falling into place perfectly, you're actually going to put yourself in quite a difficult situation. It may be that you then get a year down the line and suddenly they're saying, well, really your business is still only worth 5 million. So you're going to massively dilute yourself and the other shareholders and just put everyone in quite an uncomfortable position. So while obviously everyone wants the business to be worth more, and once investors are on board, they obviously want the business to be worth more, having a rational and well-reasoned valuation is very important. Find the metrics that you think are relevant, that really underpin your valuation, and make sure that it is based on data and your actual performance. That's a kind of a broad view of a little bit kind of our experience, some kind of based on working with a range of portfolio companies. And what I wanted to do now is just to dive in a little bit deeper into a couple of these portfolio companies, to pick up ways in which they have, or both been good to work with from our perspective, but are doing some of the things that I think I've touched on already to establish a sort of sustainable business model, a strong competitive position through solving key problems and issues that in the first instance are challenges, but if once solved, reinforce those competitive advantages and really build the foundations for the long-term success of the business. So the first company talk about, portfolio company of ours, is a business called Zoodmall. Now, hopefully some of you have heard of this. Today it's the largest cross-border e-commerce platform in Central Asia, with a presence in the Middle East also. It is a e-commerce marketplace, so it doesn't hold any inventory. Think like AliExpress, so similar to that. It operates in Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and then across the Middle East as well. This is a business we have known since 2015, and we were the first external investors in the business. It's led by probably the most talented entrepreneur that we have come across anywhere in Central Asia, and has been doing phenomenally well recently. But its success now is built on the hard work that it put in over the course of 2 years or so to establish the key infrastructure and to solve the core problems that had meant larger players such as AliExpress hadn't really been operating as much as you would expect in Central Asia and some of these Middle Eastern countries. Now, what are these problems? these three problems, the first one is logistics. How do you get products delivered across a large area, large region such as Kazakhstan, where quite often the local delivery infrastructure isn't very well developed, and it isn't a kind of plug and play system as an international company. So Zoodmall spent a year or so building up relationships with every national post company and local post delivery companies in every country that it operates, such that it can now deliver parcels cross-border and last mile delivery pretty much anywhere in any of the countries that it operates. The second issue you have is payments. Now, across much of Central Asia, for a lot of people, cash is still king. Those that have bank cards, quite often they can be local, sort of local payment gateways, local payment infrastructure, such as in Uzbekistan. And these don't integrate well or easily with say, the sort of international payment systems. So what Zoodmall did is it built its own back-end infrastructure such that it could accept payments from Visa, MasterCard, any local card. It could also accept cash on delivery, which massively, what this was doing is just increasing the number of potential customers exponentially. If it had only targeted Visa and MasterCard users across Central Asia and the Middle East, it would have inherently limited the number of people who would potentially buy from the platform. So by supporting cash on delivery and the payment and collection of that, it was very important. And what they're doing now is launching something called Zood Pay, which is a sort of buy now, pay later option, which is zero interest cost to the end user. The cost is borne by the supplier. And this, again, increases or decreases the barriers or the hurdles for people to interact and transact on the platform. And I think this is a very important consideration. I mean, how important is the service you're providing to your end users, and how easy is it for them to use your platform to solve that problem or to access that product or service which they currently don't have access to. And that's something Zoodmall we think is very, very good at. The final issue is, of course, if you have an e-commerce marketplace, you need to have products on the platform. So Zoodmall is integrated with JD.com in China and with Hepsi Barada in Turkey, such that it has over 4 million products on the platform right now. So here you have the ability to deliver the products, to accept payments, and you have the products themselves. And what's actually been very interesting for us is, so during COVID, the impact of sort of quarantine and restrictions was that cross-border e-commerce became much more difficult, that the logistics became more of a challenge. So what Zoodmall was able to do, given its presence already in the country, was to go to local suppliers, local companies, businesses in each country that it operates and say, list your product on our platform. And this was giving businesses a very quick to market opportunity to shift their sales online. This has been something that's been incredibly successfully implemented by the business. It's now possible for local companies, whether anywhere in Central Asia or the Middle Eastern countries where they operate, to list their products on the platform, to accept payments through the Zoodmall infrastructure. And this has been part of what's driven the company's success in the last 3 months. GMV, gross merchandise value, which is the total value of sort of products transacted through the platform, has been growing at 80% a month, and it's really delivering. It's taken the time to build the infrastructure and the base and the ecosystem that it needs, and is now really being able to capitalize on that. And I think we will continue to see that going into the future. The other business that I wanted to talk about is an Uzbek business called Bills. Now, this is a software as a service ERP solution for small and medium-sized businesses in Uzbekistan. This model has been implemented globally. You have large players such as Square or Vend who have been very successful, and the business model is clear. And I think this is a very clear example of what I was talking about, of taking tried and tested business models from the sort of from the global experience and localizing them in a country or in the Central Asia region. But what I really wanted to pick out from our experience with Bills is the quality of the data infrastructure that as a business they have and have always had. So when we first met them, it was one of the things that really impressed us as a business is how clearly they were tracking all the metrics that were important to the business, whether that was customer acquisition costs, lifetime value, just sheer number of clients, churn, net revenue churn, all these sorts of things, which for any technology-based business, software business, this is kind of the beauty of what you're doing, of what these sort of businesses are, is you have much better access to data than more traditional industries do. It's very easy for you to gather, but it's all very well being easy to gather. What's important is that you're also able to use that data and to monitor it, to put it within a framework which is business useful for you, but then also, if you're speaking to investors, useful for investors. So this is kind of the key takeaway from this business is they've been able to quantify what is important for them, for their customers, and for how they operate as a business, put it within a framework which they can track and make business useful decisions based upon. And then for us as investors, it's also made it very easy. Again, this is a business that's doing very well at the moment, and is growing rapidly in Uzbekistan. So what I hope this presentation has given you is a kind of a sense of how we as investors, when we're looking at entrepreneur-led businesses in Central Asia, what it is that we see as important for the success of a business, and that by kind of getting that perspective, it can help you in understanding potentially where you're strong, where you're weak within your own business, and thinking about ways in which you can work on that. But what I wanted to finish with is a few sort of takeaways. The first one, maybe this sounds a little bit strange, but with your business, think about camels, not unicorns. Now that may sound a little bit strange. It comes from a book by Alex Lazaro called Out Innovate, which, if you haven't read it or come across it, I would highly recommend. And his point here is, unicorns are these sort of fairy tale creatures that live in a sort of perfect world, and they're sort of they're incredible, and they're amazing, but they don't exist in reality. They don't exist in a world where people face challenges on a day-to-day basis. And what I guess the translation of this into the business environment, and particularly for venture businesses, is unicorns is a sort of idea that's come from the US, and everyone wants to build $1 billion business. But in the reality of frontier markets such as Central Asia is there is much greater economic uncertainty and instability within the ecosystem that you're working, which makes this sort of perfect idea of a unicorn, I think harder to achieve. But that's not to say you can't build $1 billion business, but it's, think of your $1 billion business more like a camel. That is a business which, the camel is an animal that is incredibly well adapted to survive in very harsh environments for extended period of time with limited resources, water, food. And that's what your business, what a successful frontier market startup often resembles more. That is, it's a business which, when you see them down the line, it seems obvious that they were going to be successful, but they've been successful because they've been able to take what limited resources they have, use them incredibly effectively, and to sort of ration them in a way such that when times are tough, they're able to survive, focus on profitability, sustainability. When times are good and there's capital available to be able to grow and expand, add new verticals. And it's a sort of ongoing cycle that goes sort of push and pull. And ultimately you can end up with a very sustainable, resilient, successful business. And so that's my kind of the first point I'd like to make. The second one is your startups and the businesses you're working. and have to be technology enabled, I think, in today's world. And that means not only using the technology that's available to run the business, but also to really understand what's going on in your business. I talked about this idea of the data infrastructure, the data ecosystem that you build, both for internal use to present to investors, should you be speaking to them as well. And that's something which technology greatly improves for you, and I think can improve the quality of the business you build. A fundamental point, and I think this is really where all businesses should start, is that your business should be solving a key problem that affects the day-to-day lives of consumers or businesses. That is, you want your product to be a vital part of their lives. Whether that's businesses being the software they rely on to sell, consumers, if that's enabling them to access a product or a service in a very efficient and timely manner. If you can solve for that problem, not only are you going to create this sort of very positive social impact and impact on the society in which you're working by just improving the way that it works, but you're also going to have a customer base and a user base which is very sticky. There'll be low churn. They will stay with you for a long time. In all likelihood, you'll be able to cross-sell them other products, to build out a platform of services that you can provide them, because they'll come to trust you, they'll come to rely on you, and this will give you that defensibility, particularly, I'd say, in times when you face the economic challenges at home, or another competitor comes to the market. If you already have that strong position, then you will be very difficult for anyone to compete with. The next point, which this idea of finding investors who can bring more than just capital to your business. I think I touched on this a little bit before with the idea of sort of building out your management team, is ultimately you don't have all the skills you need to make your business a scalable success. Now that's just a reality of who we are as humans. I mean, no one has all those capabilities. So you can either bring those people in within the management and within the company itself, but you can also essentially acquire it with the investors that you bring in. So what I've shown you today, we as investors, we always have a lot of questions for you as a business, but you should have questions for us. You should be asking what we're bringing, what investors are really bringing to the table beyond capital, because capital is crucial. It's fundamentally important to the scale of the business. But as you get bigger, you're going to need that extra sort of help and advice and connections that good quality investors can really bring you. So I'd say that's something you should always bear in mind whenever you're having discussions with investors. And the sort of the final point, where I don't want to talk for too long, and I think hopefully the Q&A will be productive after this. But the final point I wanted to make is think global. Don't just think about what you can solve, or just building a business which will purely be successful in the country that you're based in. You should be thinking global, because if you're solving, and this comes back to the idea of solving a fundamental problem. If you're solving a fundamental problem that affects the day-to-day lives of businesses or consumers in your country, I can pretty much guarantee you that there will be other countries in the region, within sort of the CIS region, or globally, that face those same problems. And if you can develop a solution which works in Kazakhstan, in Uzbekistan, in wherever you are, if your solution works there, there's quite a high chance that it can work elsewhere. So there's a business we're looking at the moment, which is really helping small merchants and their relationships with distributors. Now it's a fascinating business. It's very well run, but what's beautiful about it is these issues, small merchants have these issues all over the world. So this business is globally scalable. And this, I think, it comes back to the sort of fundamental point that I'll finish on, is really finding a business or identifying a problem which is fundamental to people's day-to-day lives and solving for that. If you can solve that problem, you will create a product, you will create a service, you will create a business that people really need, they want, and they like. And that will be the driver of your growth. It'll give you the ability to build add-on services around that. It'll give you the ability to scale a business in the region you're operating in, and then it opens up regional and global opportunities for your business. So I think I've talked at you for long enough. I hope that has been useful and that has been interesting. And I look forward to answering whatever questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, dear Robin. It was very interesting and very useful. And you can speak as much as you want, because it was really very interesting. I was listening for the whole presentation, and it was very useful.
Thank you. I'm glad.
There is a question in a chat box. Yeah, so it's in English language.
Oh, yes. The question is, it was interesting to hear your feedback about Central Asia startup projects. Who else you can mark on our market? What are the projects you could highlight? Okay, that's an interesting one. And I can talk more about some of our portfolio companies if people would like. I mean, there are kind of businesses that have been in the news recently, such as Kaspi, which I'm sure you all know Kaspi very well, much better than I do. I imagine quite a few of you are users of the Kaspi ecosystem. And what we think is beautiful about the Kaspi business model is this sort of self-perpetuating ecosystem they've built whereby consumers or users who engage with one product are then sort of fed through and become automatic, or then become users of the other products within the ecosystem. So if you're using their marketplace, you're then able to get financing loans from the sort of fintech from the bank. The payment. Sorry, I get a bit of feedback, but the payment aspect as well further supports the marketplace and the bank side as well. So I think that's a really beautiful business, and one that I think that the idea of an ecosystem of products that tie into each other is one that you as entrepreneurs and founders should think about how you can add additional services and products on top. And actually, that kind of ties into another thing which we really like when we're looking at businesses and when we're thinking about businesses, is if you think, and the sort of the overarching theme is financial services and banking. If you think about banking historically, the way that banks acquired clients was by offering them deposits. And offering them a certain rate of return, a certain interest rate on deposits. So customer acquisition for them was a cost item. And then they lend the money out and they generate their income based on the interest margin. And that's historically how they've worked. And so it's been a constant kind of battle managing that relationship between the deposit rate and your loan rate. But what we think is really interesting now, and I think we see it with Kaspi, you've seen it with groups like Ant Financial, is other players or other service providers, technology firms who already have a user base, who already have a customer base, who they have acquired through revenue generating activities, as in they already make money from those users, and then overlaying financial services on top of that, I think is a really interesting and much more profitable way to sort of provide financial services. And I think this is it's an idea that we've seen in sort of various guises by different companies operating globally, but also in Central Asia. I think there's this idea that I hear quite a bit of building a super app, and that's what lots of people want to do. And I think it's a very interesting idea, but what you fundamentally need in the first place is a customer base, a user base who are using your product or service on a regular basis. Again, that comes back to, if it's solving a fundamental problem for them, then they're more likely to carry on using it, and to be using it on a regular basis. So that's not sure if that really answered the question that was being asked, but just some more thoughts on a kind of ecosystem idea and looking to overlay and sort of intertwine additional products and services. I see there are a couple more questions in the chat, but sadly my Russian is limited.
I will kindly ask our translators to translate the questions. If you hear me, if Igor and Irina hear me, could you please help? Because I don't hear you. Let me.
No, thank you. I think that's a very that's
ask a question.
Sorry, someone did translate the question for me. It's
someone is translating.
Sure, yeah, and then I'll come to your question after, of course.
Okay, thanks.
But so the question was how a startup founder should deal with an investor who is putting pressure on them to make a decision or to act in a certain way. I think that's if I understood correctly. Now, the unhelpful answer is this will always depend on what the situation is and what the investor is asking. Now, from our perspective, when we invest in businesses, from an operational perspective, we don't tend to want to be involved on the day-to-day. And that's because when we invest in a business, we're doing so because we believe the management team and the team in place is a very high quality and has the ability to build that business themselves. So I would say what you should try and do in the first place when you're attracting investment is to have a clear understanding of where the investor or where you would like the investor to help to be involved and to support the business. So in our case, what we work a lot with businesses is on gathering data, identifying what data is important, putting it into a framework that they and we can track, and also supporting them in more financial decisions. So capital allocation, which project to invest in, building the model to decide does this new business vertical make sense? What are the costs associated? What capital needs to be invested? What are the opportunity costs? This sort of thing, which I think is a particular, our sense as very much financial investors is real value we add. So pre-investment, try and be clear, and this is something that should come from the investor side as well, is be clear on where you would like assistance and help, and where perhaps you also wouldn't. And I don't think that's something you should be worried about saying, that actually you don't want them involved in day-to-day because it's probably not practical or useful. But if you are facing that sort of pressure, I think the first thing to do, and it'll depend on your relationship with the investor, but is to try and have a clear conversation with them on whatever the issue is, whatever it is that they're getting involved in, and also try and think why are they pressuring you? is it because something isn't working, or do you think it's an ulterior motive? If it's an ulterior motive, I'm not sure there's much I can do to help there. But you'll have to sort of play it by ear and on a situation by situation basis. But I think the sort of the fundamental advice would be that you should, fundamental advice you should, when you are accepting an investor into the company, make sure you're comfortable with them, you have a good relationship with them in the first place, and you have a clear sense of where and when they should or shouldn't be involved in the day-to-day or the operational or the financial side of the business.
Thank you. May I ask a question now?
Sure, yes.
Indeed, very engaging presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You mentioned a lot that when we invest in businesses, I was wondering what kind of businesses would you invest in? Is it only IT that you're interested in, or any other projects you could also potentially be interested in?
Sure. No, thank you. Thank you very much for your kind words about the presentation and for your question as well. So within the current fund that we are actively investing at the moment, we do focus on technology and technology-enabled businesses. Now these range from financial services to e-commerce marketplaces to software, and particularly software as a service businesses. So there is, from our side, from our current fund, a preference for IT and technology-based companies. Now that is a function of where we believe the greatest opportunity is for both generating financial returns, but also social impact. So how can we impact on the most people? For us, we particularly pay attention to the number of jobs that are supported by the businesses that we invest in, as we believe it's employment is the most powerful tool for empowering people and their lives. But within IT and technology, look, we're very open. We're always interested to hear about new businesses and new ideas. As I think I've repeated quite a few times, and apologies if it's becoming quite repetitive, but it is that idea of solving a fundamental problem, a real issue that affects people's day-to-day lives. If you're doing that, then I think you have the chance to build a very successful business.
Thank you very much. Another question, you mentioned technology-enabled businesses. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? What do you mean by that? And then I will.
Sure. No, I think a technology-enabled business, that's a pretty broad term, but it's a business that relies on IT, on technology, on sort of digital infrastructure to do most of what it's doing. So I think a greenhouse growing tomatoes wouldn't come into that, but if it was a technology solution. Yeah, so hydroponics for us wouldn't fit within that sort of technology enabled. But if there was a company that was developing software and the infrastructure that better enabled the greenhouses to ship their products from the greenhouse to stores, now that would be something we'd be very interested in. So optimizing the system that exists at the moment, building new technologies and solutions that bring efficiency gains and just improve the overall productivity and effectiveness of a market. Now that's the sort of thing that we find very interesting.
Okay, so hydroponics would definitely not count when it comes to investment, to getting initial investment there.
For us in our current fund, no. But I think as an opportunity, it's a very interesting one, just not for our fund at the moment.
Okay, thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you for your questions.
Thank you.
Hello, Robin. I also have a question. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
I would like to ask, what about your success rate at your Sturgeon Capital fund?
Sure. No, that's always an important question. It's all very well to talk about theory, but so if you look at a business like Zoodmall, so we first invested in 2015, and we were the first external investor. That business is now has just closed its Series A, valued at 50 million. GMV has grown from an annualized GMV run rate at the beginning of the year of around 2 million. It is now around 50 million. So while that business isn't one where you have a sort of a confirmed exit, however, operationally and financially, it has performed very well. Sure. Okay. So the question was to list the unicorns with which we've already worked. So we to date don't have any direct experience with unicorns. I mean, having invested in Central Asia, there are, I mean, from a purely technology-based perspective, Kaspi is probably the only one you could argue as having successfully achieved that unicorn status, and very successfully achieved unicorn status with its IPO last month. So based on that, there are no unicorns that we've worked with from Central Asia so far. However, we hope that from among the current crop of entrepreneurs and founders and startups working in the region, and what we really see is the potential for individuals such as yourselves to build unicorn or camels, whichever way you want to call them, but to build these very successful businesses, given what you have in the region, which is that base digital infrastructure, this sort of secular trend of increased digitalization, the lack of existing sort of baggage. By that I mean people are very willing and sort of able to adopt new technologies in ways in a much more flexible manner than, say, they are in the West. And I think it's only a matter of time before you start seeing more unicorns being born in Central Asia. Okay, so thank you for translating that question, Irina. So the question of sort of this idea of smart money, and I mean, how do you find it, and how do you encourage it? Now, I think this is probably one of the main challenges that you as entrepreneurs will be facing, is raising capital in Central Asia at the moment. I think it's changing rapidly, as in we're seeing more and more players entering the market, both international investors, but also local investors with a much greater degree of sophistication that can really bring value to your business. But ultimately, there isn't a lot of smart money around at the moment. I would say what you can do is to work with the incubators such as MOST and the others that are operating in Kazakhstan. You have incubators in Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan. These, it may not be the smart money that you would like to really grow your business, but it is certainly smart in terms of helping you grow and develop your business model, your business idea into something that can be successful and grow. And when it comes to smart money, I mean, I'd always say that at Sturgeon Capital, we're always interested to hear about new businesses. And while I won't say that we're the smartest money in the world, I think we have a pretty unique skill set and experience of investing in Central Asian startups, and that we can bring that. But otherwise, it's the other opportunity is looking for angels, business angels who operate and have been successful within the sector that you're targeting, whether that's logistics to retail, whatever it is you're targeting, and that area is there someone who has been very successful who you believe may be able to provide you that in both initial capital, but also access potentially to their network, to their experience, to the sort of their understanding, their connections, this sort of thing. Then I think at the moment that's quite a good way to start. But thank you for that question. That's an interesting one, and I think will remain a challenge for a while in Central Asia is really finding that smart money. Oh, no, thank you for translating. So the question around can you attract investment when you're still purely at the idea stage, so with no track record or anything like that, and it is possible. I suppose for us, when we would consider investing in such an idea, would be if it was and this would really be if it was a business model that had been successfully implemented elsewhere by a certain team or group of individuals, managers, and they wanted to take that idea and implement it in a country where the opportunity set was clear and it seemed to make sense to do so. So in that sense, I suppose that's not quite the question you're asking. You're asking when it's a sort of a purely new idea that no one's ever done before. And really in that case, that's where you should be looking to your incubators, to your accelerators, because I mean, you do get investment in say Silicon Valley in these companies that are still at the idea stage. But that I think is as much a reflection on the availability of capital, as in there's so much VC funding flowing around the ecosystem in Silicon Valley that people are sort of constantly having to look earlier and earlier in terms of how developed a business is. But even if someone is investing in a business that's still at an idea stage, they'll only be doing it if the management team or the founders in place have either experience founding and growing businesses or a deep experience and understanding of the industry that they're working in. So if one of you has worked in logistics for many years and really understands how the sector works, what the problems are, and where the opportunity is to solve those problems, then that I think is a situation where it'd be easier to attract investment because you could demonstrate that you really understood what was wrong and how you were going to solve it. But if you'd never worked in logistics in your life, but you thought you had this kind of nice idea and you didn't really have much of an understanding, I'd say it will be more difficult in that situation for you to raise capital. So I hope that answers your question to some degree. I can, yes. Sorry, I've got two people translating at once. Sorry. Sorry, Irina. Can you carry on? Sure. Okay. Oh, no, thank you. That's a really good question. Of the sort of process from demo day or even initial introduction to investment. I mean, what happens? And I think what one I can use, which is a good example, is Bill's, the Uzbek company that I talked about earlier. So we first met Bill's in February 2019. And as I mentioned, we were instantly impressed with the team, with the product, what they were trying to do. We met them once. They shared more data with us, presentation, the sort of financial model, historical track record, we then sort of went away. We spent a couple of weeks looking at it. We then met with the management team again to go over more questions. And this is unfortunately, well, back then we could do it all in person, face to face, which I much prefer. But at the moment, as you can see from this, everything's happening over Zoom. Hopefully we can go back to normal communication, meeting face to face. But when we met Bill's, it was all face to face. And it was probably, I would say, about 2 months from initial meeting to us completing our investment, or agreeing to make our investment. Now, sort of throughout that process, from our side, we have various due diligence questions that we ask. Now, this relates both to the sort of operational side of the business, really trying to understand what the risks are, kind of where the business is strong, potentially where it's weak as well. So that's what takes up quite a lot of that time, is that legal, is that sort of operational and financial due diligence that we carried out. We also carry out external legal due diligence just to ensure that there's nothing, there are no liabilities or claims which may come up in the future that we weren't expecting. And I think that's something you should expect on your side as an entrepreneur. If you're speaking to an investor, that they will really want to dig deep within the company to understand how it operates, and if there's anything hidden that they should be aware of, or that they might worry about. What you have kind of alongside that is the negotiation around total investment size and valuation. Now, for early stage businesses, valuation is more of an art than a science. It's difficult to come up with an accurate or effective formula for valuing particularly very early stage businesses. So the valuation will probably be a function of your track record, your management experience, the size of the potential market, and also the size of the investment that you're raising. Certainly when we invest in businesses, we don't want to dilute the founders completely. We think it's very important that the founders retain a large share, if not majority share, in their business, because it aligns our interests with the founder, in that the founder's success depends on the success of the business, because as investors, our success depends on the success of the business. So you have negotiations over valuation, what percentage of the business you're willing to get to give to the investor in return for their investment. And like I said, there's no clear or sort of scientific way to do that. However, you will reach an agreement on a valuation. Due diligence will be completed. The legal documents will be drawn up, and then the investment will be made, and you go from there. I mean, what you'll also have to prepare is a sort of business plan, a sort of project pipeline for how you will deploy that money. Are you going to spend it on marketing? I mean, it depends what stage your business is, but are you going to spend it on marketing? Are you going to spend it on product development? Are you going to spend it on establishing a new vertical, building out the team? That's something that once, as you're going through due diligence, you'll have to be to be reasonably clear with the investor where you're going to spend their money, because they want to know kind of to be able to monitor what the return on investment is. What are you really, and that's not necessarily meaning you have to be generating revenue through the investment, but if they're going to invest 100,000 so that you can develop a new product, you need to sort of show them how long that's going to take, what it's going to cost, what success looks like at the end of that. And then once the investment has been made, it'll be ongoing on a monthly basis, quarterly. I mean, particularly at an early stage, you'll probably be in communication with the investor, maybe on a weekly basis, and having an ongoing discussion about how things are going. They're there to help, to advise, to sort of support you in whatever ways they can. So, I mean, a good process from that initial meeting to the investment should be an enjoyable experience for you as a founder, because the investor will be challenging you on your business and on your business model, and wanting to really understand how it works, where it's strong, where it's weak. But ultimately, if they get to the point that they want to invest, it's a real endorsement for your business, for you, and for your team, that it has potential. Thank you. That's it's an interesting question. I mean, how do you handle yourself in the sort of post demo day networking arena? And this, I can understand that quite a lot of founders can be maybe a bit shy about their business. Not used to speaking to investors, maybe particularly international investors, who will ask difficult questions, not because they're trying to trip you up, but just because they want to understand your business, and they want to really get to the bottom of how you operate and how you work. My advice would be, I suppose there's two things. I mean, if before the event you're given a list of investors who are going to be there, maybe spend a bit of time going through that list, looking if they have websites, if they have contact details, if they have information about them, understanding, is that investor likely to be interested in my product? Now, if it's an institutional investor like us, we have a website which clearly says what we invest in. But it may be that they're a private individual or less formal investor, in which case it may be more difficult. But beforehand, if you have that list, go through, familiarize yourself with the different companies and individuals who are going to be there, so that you're prepared, you understand who you should try and speak to at least. And then, and ultimately, I think that just the most important thing is get out there and start speaking to people. And I know sometimes it seems like, you might wonder, like, why would someone be interested, or you're just sort of not sure. But the worst, there is no bad result from speaking to an investor about your business. If they say, no, I'm not interested, great, then you know not to waste your time speaking to them. Maybe they come back and they say, yeah, I quite like your business, but I think it has this fundamental problem. That's really useful feedback. And then I guess that's the sort of the other point is, success or a successful conversation doesn't necessarily mean you get investment. A successful conversation can just be the feedback they give you. Maybe they say, yeah, I like it, but I don't like this bit, or I think you need to think more about this. That's really useful information for you. And I think just if and when you can, get as much feedback and input from external sources, because that's how you really test ideas, test your thesis, test your business plan. And generally, I think most investors will be willing to talk. I mean, there might not be that they can invest in your business because it just doesn't match their mandates, but that doesn't mean they won't be willing to give you advice. So I think the sort of key thing is get out there and just put yourself out there, speak about your business, try and make as many people aware about it as possible, because that maximizes the chances of ultimately finding an investor, but also of just improving the quality of your business. Thank you. It's a good question. I mean, the question around what does a startup do if it fails and it loses the investor the money that they invested? Now, what happens then slightly depends on the form that your investment took, or the investment took. So if it was straight up equity, and the investor has purely invested in the equity of the business, then it is a risk they take that the business fails and that equity becomes nothing. And that's a nature of investing in any business, whether it's a startup or otherwise. If you invest in the purely in the equity, there is a chance that becomes worth nothing. And this will depend on what country you're in and what the laws are around bankruptcy, and sort of business and going out of business. I know that, so in the UK, it's sort of allowed and it's perfectly sort of acceptable. I don't know, and I can't offer any sort of legal advice on sort of say Kazakhstan or Uzbekistan local law, but that's something to be aware of beforehand. Have a lawyer review the term sheet, understand what your liabilities might be should the business fail. But if it's equity, then you should be okay, assuming you haven't been negligent and willfully caused the business to fail. Then you may be liable. However, if you've raised the investment as a convertible note or some form of debt, it may be that debt gives the investor the ability to claim personal assets of your own. Now that's quite extreme, unlikely, but if you have debt, then that debt will probably have priority over your over the equity holders, which was you, the founder, and anyone else who owns equity. So it depends on how your investment has been structured, what the local legal environment allows, and what it doesn't allow. So it is something to be aware of before accepting investment. Make sure you have a lawyer review the investment terms and the investment agreement before you sign it, and you understand what your liabilities would be. But I mean, really, early stage businesses, the statistics on how many fail is pretty much all early stage businesses fail in one way or another, and that's just the reality of trying something new. So kind of don't be afraid of failure, and if you do fail, make sure you learn from it. Use those lessons. See it as an opportunity, so that the next time, next business you start, if you do start another one, you make sure not to fail for the same reasons. Sure. No, question around sort of what are the main data points that you should provide to an investor when you first start speaking to them. Really, I mean, you want to provide the data that is relevant for your business. So if you're a B2B software provider, I mean, they'll want to know how many customers you have, what the sort of monthly recurring revenue is. Say it's a SaaS business model, what your monthly recurring revenue is, what your churn rate is, so how many customers are you losing on a monthly basis, how many are you adding, where, I mean, if you have different payment packages, maybe there's a freemium model, maybe there's a paying subscription model. So they want to sort of know the breakdown between paying customers, non-paying customers. That's fairly sort of kind of high level data. That gives that instantly gives an investor an understanding of how the business is operating, how it's generating revenue, what the trajectory is. Is it going up? Is it stable? Is it going down? And this is, I mean, this isn't going in your presentation necessarily, but this is going in the data room, the data framework that you're providing to an investor once discussions have begun. You're looking at your marketing spend, how are you acquiring clients, what is it costing you to acquire them, comparing that against the lifetime value or the revenue you're generating. How long does it take your clients to sort of pay back the cost of acquiring them? I think details also on who your clients are. That's a really important one, because it might be obvious to you, but it's not always necessarily obvious to an investor exactly who your clients are, and how you're acquiring them, or why do they need your why do they need your product, your service, what's the sort of problem it's solving. And that's maybe more qualitative, but that kind of adds to the data, the financial data you're adding. I think also important to show historical revenues and costs, and break down your costs between maybe your staff costs and your marketing and general costs. I mean, doesn't need to be a perfect profit and loss statement. You're a startup, you're an early stage business. They're not expecting you to have every detail perfect, but for us, it's very important, and it's very encouraging when we see a business that is tracking important data on a monthly basis or even a daily basis, but aggregating it over the course of a month, to really understand how it is performing, where it's doing well, where it isn't, and going forward. So I hopefully that it depends what your business is, but you should know what the important data points are for your business. And those are what you should be presenting to an investor. If you don't know what the important data for your business is, then there's not much an investor can do to really help you there. An investor can fine tune and add data points that might be useful, that might be relevant, but the core ones, you should really understand what the core data points and metrics that you should be tracking are. Okay. I don't think there's any more questions at the moment, unless there's any from organizers or anyone else. Please feel free, ask away.
Yeah, I propose to somebody who, if there are any startups here who participates in this part, to pitch their idea to you and to get a feedback from you.
Sure. I'm happy to do that if anyone wants.
Yeah,
just
let me ask it in Russian again. Okay. For them. Дорогие участники, если среди нас есть стартапы или предприниматели, помните, как на сессии с Игорем Овчаренко мы разбирали прямо кейс, ну, вот идею стартапа. Если сейчас есть желающие, мне кажется, это отличная идея получить очень быстрый экспресс-фидбэк от Робина про ваш проект. Вот. Если есть желающие, пожалуйста, выходите в эфир и коротко расскажите нам про свой проект. Как обычно, даем 5 секунд на размышление, чтобы смелость прибавилась. Игорь, кто здесь? Назабиргым, Шодигуль, Ербулат, Анара, Жасур. Если вы предприниматели, Айсулу, может быть, вы же, кстати, ну хотя вы будете развивать. Айнур. Или можно задать любой вопрос Робину, ну, тоже устно, если что-то еще вот хочется узнать про инвестиции. Жаль, что нет вопросов. Окей, хорошо.
If anyone does, okay. But if anyone wants to share their presentation, details about their startup after this, please do. I'm sure that the organizers can share my email and my contact details, WhatsApp, Telegram, however you want to reach out. If it's easier to do afterwards, I appreciate being put on the spot is a little bit tricky. So if you want to get in touch, please do. And I'll always give feedback. I can't say anything about whether we'll invest, but I can guarantee that we'll be able to give feedback. I think you're on mute, Dinara.
Все, окей. Вот мне в русской быть, чтобы вы могли меня перевести, да? В русской дорожке. Я могу вот выключить, и вы сейчас тоже меня слышите, да? Ладно, остаюсь в русской дорожке, потому что когда я выключаю перевод, я не слышу. Угу. Не могли бы, пожалуйста, перевести, что это отличная возможность для ребят сразу дойти до такого человека, как Робин, и перескочить всех офис-менеджеров, холодные звонки и много-много встреч. Это хорошая возможность по сокращению пути доступа к инвестиционной компании. Вот, мы очень рады, что Робин такую возможность предоставил. И хотели бы поблагодарить Робина за то, что он покрыл тему очень широко и объемно, раскрыл очень много нюансов про инвестиции. Это было невероятно интересно и, я думаю, полезно для всех участников.
I'd just like to say thank you from me to everyone for joining, to the team at MOST and USAID and everyone else who's been involved in setting this up. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen to me, and I look forward to hopefully hearing from some of you directly after this.
Thank you so much. We are very glad to have you as a speaker on the Global Entrepreneurship Week.
Anytime, and good luck with the rest of the week.
Thank you. Thank you. So now your session comes to the end.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and I guess we'll be in touch afterwards.
We hope. Miras from our side is the contact.
Yes.
So thank you again. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Oh, you are in UK. We have 6 hours difference.
Yeah, so
now it's only the beginning of the day.
Yeah, still early in the day for me. So, but good luck with the rest of the entrepreneurship week. And yeah, like I said, I look forward to hearing from some of these entrepreneurs afterwards.
Thank you so much, and yeah, have a good day too.
Cheers. Thank you very much. Bye.
Well, bye-bye. Дорогие участники, третий день глобальной недели предпринимательства подошел к концу. Благодарим вас за участие. Мы скоро пришлем анкету по обратной связи, которую очень попросим вас заполнить. Вот если Тимирлан, мой коллега, здесь, она просто у меня не под рукой, эта анкета, если мой коллега Тимирлан на связи и сможет переслать, Тимирлан, ты тут? Буду очень признательна, если ты сможешь...
Может выслать ваш коллега.
Что, Ануар?
Может выслать ваш коллега Ануар.
О, супер, если она у тебя есть, эта анкета, супер, буду признательна, если ссылку вот на анкету поделитесь. Уважаемые участники, будем очень признательны, если вы заполните 2-минутный, там очень все коротко, там просто баллы вы выставляете, не больше там 1 минуты займет обратная связь, она очень для нас важна, по тому, какие спикеры были, насколько для вас это было интересно, что нового вы узнали. Нам будет это очень важно. Это часть, которая всегда есть на глобальной неделе предпринимательства. Мы вот всегда высылаем в конце такие небольшие формы обратной связи, чтобы быть ближе к вам и делать еще более полезные вещи. Сейчас. Напомним, да, что это была глобальная неделя предпринимательства, которая ежегодно объединяет более 40 тысяч мероприятий по всему миру. Участниками становятся порядка 10 миллионов людей из 180 стран. И Казахстан участник глобальной недели предпринимательства уже очень много лет. В 2014 мы точно проводили ГЕФ, возможно, мы вот представители уже с 2010 года, и каждый год проводим разные мероприятия во время глобальной недели предпринимательства. Глобальная неделя предпринимательства – это движение, то есть это не организация, это не компания какая-то, это просто движение, под эгидой которого во многих странах проводятся разные предпринимательские мероприятия совершенно разных форматов. К сожалению, в этом году не удалось провести его офлайн, в этом году мы проводим его онлайн, как, собственно, наверное, и большинство стран в мире. И в этом году, в 2020 году, глобальная неделя предпринимательства реализуется в Казахстане при поддержке проекта USAID по развитию предпринимательства и бизнес-среды, или проект, который называется FGI, Future Growth Initiative. Вот. У нас, возможно, в среду состоится еще одна интересная встреча со стартапом, который привлек инвестиции. Мы будем держать вас в курсе. Об этом можно будет узнать на нашем сайте most.com.kz/gef2020. На наших страничках в социальных сетях, это Facebook или Instagram, в поиске можно набрать most.com.kz, и там будут известны следующее мероприятие. А также на сайте и в наших социальных страничках мы стараемся публиковать мероприятия, которые пройдут в том числе в Центральной Азии. То есть если наши партнеры в Центральной Азии, например, из Киргизстана или из Узбекистана, тоже проводят мероприятия под эгидой глобальной недели предпринимательства, об этом в том числе можно узнать и от нас. То есть мы стараемся поддерживать друг друга, и можно принять участие в невероятных классных ивентах, которые проводят партнеры по всей Центральной Азии вот, во время глобальной недели предпринимательства. Вот. Благодарим вас за участие. Желаем вам всем хорошего вечера. Вот. Мы поговорили в эти 3 дня про предпринимательство на разные темы, про акселераторы, про темы для стартапов, про программу наставничества, про инвестиции разговаривали много. И надеемся вас всех увидеть в следующем году, тоже на глобальной неделе предпринимательства. Вот. Можно подписаться на нашу рассылку, можно следить за нашими активностями в социальных сетях. Большинство разных активностей, мероприятий, программ, которые реализуются нами, вместе с нашими партнерами, они бесплатные для участников. Поэтому будет еще впереди много всего интересного. Вот. Если интересуетесь темой предпринимательства, можно вступать в телеграм-канал или подписаться на рассылку. Вот, Ануар, если ты хочешь что-то добавить. Если нет, то тогда на этом прощаемся с вами. Благодарим наших партнеров, проект USAID по развитию предпринимательства в Центральной Азии, предпринимательства и экосистемы. Вот, до встречи на Глобальной неделе предпринимательства в следующем году. Всего доброго, дорогие участники. Да, и, пожалуйста, еще раз напомним, что очень просим перейти по ссылке, которая сейчас в чате Zoom, и заполнить анкету обратной связи. Займет не больше 1 минутки, правда. Там очень простые вопросы, и нужно просто поставить там от 1 до 5, ну, вот какие-то такие вещи. Все очень просто, анкета очень быстрая, но очень важная для нас. Можно заполнять анонимно, если желаете. Вот вам спасибо, дорогие участники. Без вас бы мероприятие не имело бы даже в онлайне той атмосферы, которая с вами. Спасибо вам за ваши вопросы и за участие.